Hi friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Rachel. Today's video is going to be me sharing all of my fantasy romance book recommendations. As we all know on this channel, or if you are new, you are about to find out, fantasy romance is my absolute favorite genre, subgenre of all time. I absolutely love the genre. It means so much to me. This genre really helped me fall back into reading as an adult, and I am constantly reading more and more fantasy romances and trying to find more favorites. So I have quite a few recommendations here that I'm very, very excited about. And I do feel like I have a little bit of something for everyone. I have great beginner recommendations. I also have recommendations if you are a veteran to the genre like myself and you're just looking for something new. I feel like I will be able to provide something for everyone in this video, but I definitely want to make this like a series on my channel. As I read more fantasy romance, I will bring you all more recommendations, but these I feel like are kind of the standard fantasy romance recommendations that I have for right now. All of these books in this video are either a 4-star or a 5-star read for me, so let's get into it. These are all of my fantasy romance book recommendations. All right, so the very first fantasy romance recommendation that I have for you all, it is, to me, the blueprint of fantasy romance. This is the series that if someone came to me and they were a total beginner, they had never read a fantasy romance before, but they were curious about the genre, this is the series that I would recommend you start with. I call it the gateway into fantasy romance. It's a very addicting series, super, super amazing. Definitely helped me fall in love with the genre. I'm sure you all know what I'm about to say, but that is the A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. This series is extremely popular, very iconic, and definitely, as I said, helped me fall in love with fantasy romance. I absolutely love Sarah J. Maas's writing style. I love the characters, and the romance in this series is just top tier. So I realized as I was preparing for this video, I have never actually talked about what the ACOTAR series is about on my channel, even though I talk about it all the time. But this is an adult fantasy romance series. Our main character's name is Feyre. Feyre is a human girl living in a village, which is kind of near these very mysterious and dangerous Fey lands. Feyre and her family are definitely down on their luck, struggling to survive. So Feyre goes out into the nearby forest to go hunting, and one day she ends up killing a very large wolf. But she quickly finds out that the wolf that she killed was not just a wolf, it was actually a Fey shifter from the nearby Fey lands, and now Feyre owes a debt to the spring court where this Fey came from. A beast named Tamlin shows up on her doorstep and says that she either needs to die right now to pay her debt, or she has to come live in the Fey lands forever. Feyre, of course, decides to go with this beast named Tamlin, who is actually a Fey just in his shifter form, and lives out her days in the spring court. Once she gets there though, she realizes that there is kind of a curse spreading across this Fey lands, and she kind of just gets involved in a lot more than she bargained for. That is just scratching the surface of what this whole series is about. This is actually like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, which is funny because when you think about the series as a whole, after you've read it, you're like, that's such a small part, but that is how we get started with this series. So the first book is A Court of Thorns and Roses. The second book is A Court of Mist and Fury, and this book, see, the ACOTAR series I feel like is overall kind of like the gateway, the blueprint for fantasy romance, but this book in particular is like the blueprint for fantasy romance contained in one book. I think it is perfection. I think it is fantastic. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It is tied with another book for my favorite book in the series. I have so many friends who say that this is their favorite book of all time, or like top 3, and for good reason. It is so amazing. I feel like most people think that this is the best in the series, and it's just like, it can't be touched. It's amazing. And then we have A Court of Wings and Ruin, A Court of Frost and Starlight, and then A Court of Silver Flames, which is my other favorite book in the series. I love the characters that this particular book follows. It is so, so good. It is like a healing therapy journey when you read this book, and I just love it so, so much. And as of right now, this series is not finished. I believe there's at least 2 more books coming out, probably in like 20 years, but I know that Sarah J. Maas says there is more to come for ACOTAR for sure. So definitely an excellent place to start if you are new to the fantasy romance genre. All right, another Sarah Janet series that I'm going to recommend in this video is the Crescent City series, which is House of Earth and Blood and House of Sky and Breath. There are only 2 books out right now. The 3rd book comes out in January, and I believe that there are several more books that are going to be written, so the series is just getting started. So this is another fantasy romance series, but it is set in a futuristic modern world, especially compared to ACOTAR, which is like a little more medieval, I would say. But in this series, we are in a city, we are in a metropolis, and we are following our main character. Her name is Bryce. She is half Fae, half human, and this world that Sarah J. Maas has created in this book is so amazing. I love all of the magical, mythical creatures that are in this book. We have vampires, witches, wolf shifters, fae, mermaids, angels, like every single magical creature that you can think of lives in this world, and it's so amazing. And in this book, our main character Bryce ends up begrudgingly teaming up with a fallen angel named Hunt Athalar, and the two of them have to investigate a string of murders in the city. I love this book so much. This is the book that got me into fantasy romance. This is the first fantasy book that I picked up in my 20s, I think, at all. I read fantasy a lot when I was younger, but I was kind of sticking with more like thrillers and a random romance here and there in my late teens and early 20s. And I picked this book up and it just blew my mind, and I absolutely love it. It's my favorite book, and I just cannot say enough good things about it. So House of Earth and Blood, another solid fantasy romance. And then the sequel, House of Sky and Breath, was amazing. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a really great sequel, and it's pretty crazy. That's all I can really say. It's pretty wild. The third book, House of Flame and Shadow, comes out on January 30th of 2024, and that is the day that I will perish because I'm not going to be able to survive that book. But I'm so excited. I'm literally counting down the days. This series is super fantastic and definitely responsible for my love of fantasy romance. All right, next we are going to be moving on to the Carissa Broadbent section of the video because I have two series by her that I want to talk about that I really loved. And these are also both good, like, beginner fantasy romance series. If you are new to the genre, or maybe you've already read ACOTAR, but you want something a little bit different, Carissa Broadbent is another great place to start. So first up, I recommend the War of Lost Hearts trilogy. This is a completed series, and I believe it was her first series that she wrote. The first book is Daughter of No Worlds. This follows our main character, Tisana. Tisana, at the beginning of this book, she is enslaved, but she does escape slavery, and she ends up going to this kind of like military government group called the Orders, and her whole plan is she wants to hone her magic, get stronger, enlist the help of the Orders, and then go back and save the other people who are still enslaved from where she came from. There is a much more kind of sinister government plot going on in this book, which I think was a really fascinating and amazing plot twist. And my absolute favorite part of this book in this whole series is the romance. So Tisana ends up getting trained by an ex-Order member named Max. Max wants nothing to do with the Orders, and he absolutely wants nothing to do with Tisana as well. So they're kind of like reluctant trainer and trainee, and they have a very slow burn romance. I connected so much to their romance and to these characters. Their romance just felt so sweet and honest to me. I just found them to be such lovable characters, and I think the two of them are amazing. Also, the way that like this book starts and then the way that the last book ends is just like so poetic and so fantastic, and I was literally sobbing at the end of the last book. And I just think that this is a very strong fantasy romance. So the first book is Daughter of No Worlds. The second book is Children of Fallen Gods, and the finale is Mother of Death and Dawn, which is my personal favorite cover. Overall, I give this series a 4-star rating. I think it's really strong, but I think that Carissa's other series, which I'm about to talk about, is much stronger, both with writing, plot structure, romance, and all of that. But I still think that this is a really solid place to start, especially if you're new to Carissa's books, or if you just want something different for fantasy romance. All right, so my next recommendation is probably the series that I talk about the most on my channel, I would say, and that is, of course, the Crowns of Nyaxia series, also by Carissa Broadbent. I love this series to death. It is everything to me. I love this series as much as I love the ACOTAR series. They are very different. They don't really have a ton of similarities, but they just hold very similar places in my heart. I absolutely love the characters, the romance. Carissa's writing is perfection to me. I have zero complaints about this series, so very excited to talk about it. So this series is a vampire fantasy romance series. The first book starts out with our main character, Aurea. Aurea is a human girl that was raised by vampires, and once she is of age, she decides that she wants to compete in this fight to the death vampire tournament because the winner ends up getting one wish granted by the goddess Nyaxia, and Aurea, being a human who lives in a vampire world, really wants to garner some type of protection. So she decides she has nothing to lose and she's going to participate in this tournament. She ends up teaming up with a very unlikely ally, and that is Rain, who is kind of known as this big bad vampire in the competition, but he is very intrigued by her, and she kind of reluctantly decides to team up with him as she knows she's a human in a vampire competition and she could probably use some help. And the two of them have the most like stunning romance. I love Aurea and Rain so much. I think about them all the time. They mean everything to me. So the first book in the series is The Serpent and the Wings of Night, a stunning, gorgeous 5-star. And then we have a novella called Six Scorched Roses. So this follows different characters, but but this book takes place during the events of Serpent and the Wings of Night, and these characters end up coming up later in the series. This novella follows Lilith and Vale, and Lilith is a girl living in a village where everyone is dying, everyone is sick, and Lilith believes that vampiric blood, once she kind of does some testing on it, might be able to cure a lot of people, including her sister, who is very ill. So she decides to go to the very dangerous and mysterious vampire's house named Vale, and she strikes up kind of a bargain with him. She will give him these 6 like special roses if he gives her 6 vials of his blood, and the two of them have this very dark, lush, beautiful romance story. And then we have The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. So this is the second book in the Nightborn duet, which is within the total Crowns of Nyaxia series, and I'll explain the whole series here in a second, but this is the third book that you read in the series, and I love this one so much. This is my favorite book in the series. This is my favorite book that Carissa has ever written, and I think it is a perfect fantasy romance. To me, it is what is so great about the fantasy romance genre. Everything is done so well. I absolutely love this book. And then we have another standalone in the Crowns of Nyaxia series, which is Slaying the Vampire Conqueror. This also follows totally different characters, but they are going to come up later on in the series, and it follows Selena, who is instructed to go and infiltrate this vampire conqueror's kind of army and kill him as he kind of goes on a destruction of their land. But of course, the two of them are going to fall in love. So kind of talking about the Crowns of Nyaxia series as a whole, because it can sometimes be confusing, this series is going to be made up of 3 duologies. We have the Nightborn duet. Next up is going to be the Shadowborn duet, which follows the House of Shadow Vampires. And then lastly, we are going to have the Bloodborn duet, which follows the House of Blood Vampires. While there is going to be kind of one central plot line between all 6 of these books, we are going to be switching POVs for each duology. So this was Araya and Rain's story. We're going to be following other characters in the Shadowborn duet and then also in the Bloodborn duet. But it's all connected, and Carissa has said that like Araya and Rain are going to show up in other books, and 6 Scorched Roses and Slaying the Vampire Conqueror are just standalones within the series. I definitely recommend that you do. Lilith and Vale definitely show up in The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, and Carissa has said that Selena and Atreus, who are in Slaying the Vampire Conqueror, will become important kind of later on in the series. So I just recommend reading them in the order that I showed you. That is also Carissa's recommended reading order. But overall, the Crowns of Nyaxia series, it's a 5-star perfect series to me. Another great place to start if you are new to fantasy romance. I don't think that the fantasy components are too complicated, and the romance is just so freaking good. So definitely pick this one up. So my next fantasy romance recommendation is going to be A Dawn of Onyx by Kate Golden. This is the first book in a series. The second book is coming out in April of 2024. This was recently picked up by a publisher, so I think the second book was going to come out this summer, but then due to being taken over by a traditional publisher, it's now going to be a bit of a wait. But that means you have plenty of time to read this book. So this story follows Arwen. She is a healer, and she lives in this very interesting place where the kingdoms are kind of divided out by like gemstone colors. We have the Onyx Kingdom, the Amber Kingdom, which is where Arwen lives. There's like the Garnet Kingdoms. Arwen lives in the Amber Kingdom, which has been at war with the Onyx Kingdom for some time. But everyone who lives in the Amber Kingdom is pretty surprised by this, because the Onyx Kingdom is definitely like the alpha in this land, and the Amber Kingdom doesn't really know what they want with them. But one day, Arwen ends up getting kidnapped by some Onyx soldiers and taken to the Onyx Kingdom as a prisoner. She ends up revealing that she does have some very useful healing powers in order to make sure that the soldiers do not kill her. And so while she's no longer a prisoner in the Onyx Kingdom, she does have to stay in the castle and heal the soldiers. And along the way, she ends up meeting like this dark, mysterious man. And it's one of those stories where you realize kind of maybe the powers that be aren't as bad, and maybe everything that she has been raised to believe is a lie. This story is an enemies to lovers, slow burn romance, and has a lot of hidden identity and a bit of political intrigue. I really, really love this book. I gave it 4 stars. I'm very excited for the second book because this book ends crazy, and it kind of opens up this whole new kind of lore and storyline and history that I think will be very interesting to explore in book 2. All right, next up, my next recommendation is going to be a bit more of a niche recommendation. I'm going to say straight off the bat that the series is not for everyone, and particularly I'm recommending the series to people who know for a fact that they enjoy bully romance. So that means, of course, that I am going to be talking about the Zodiac Academy series by Suzanne Valenti and Caroline Peckham. This series is wild. Okay, the series is wild, but I have to say I had so much fun binging this series last spring. The audiobooks are fantastic. I really, really enjoyed my journey with this whole series. So this series follows twins Darcy and Tori. I believe that they grew up in Chicago and have always had a very rough life, but one day they discover that they are the heirs to this Fae throne, and they end up going to the Zodiac Academy, which has a bunch of students harnessing their magical elemental powers. But when Darcy and Tori get there, they realize that their path to the throne isn't isn't going to be very easy because in their absence, there are 4 male heirs who assumed that they were going to take the throne, as everyone kind of thought that Darcy and Tori were either dead or just completely missing. So the 4 heirs that have assumed that they were going to take the throne this whole time want to make Darcy and Tori's life essentially a living hell so that they go away and they can keep the throne. So we have a magical school setting, we have lots of like relationship and drama and this and that, and some really cool magic systems. This series I like to compare to The Vampire Diaries, not in content at all, but just like The Vampire Diaries is kind of cheesy, you know, the acting is a little off, the writing is a little cringe, but it's addicting and you're gonna binge the whole thing in like 3 days, right? That is how I feel about the Zodiac Academy series. I see the flaws within the series, but I had so much fun reading it and I really grew to love so many of the characters in the series, so I still absolutely love it. Currently there are 8 books in the series. I've only read to book 7. I ended up binging the series last year. By the time I got to the 7th book, I was still enjoying myself, but I feel like this series needs to end. I think that you can love something and still be like, okay, we're done. Let's stop. Let's end this. And I think that the series is running probably a little bit too long. There is an 8th book that came out in December. That was supposed to be the last book, but the authors have now said they're extending it to a 9th book. So I am not going to be picking up the series again until it is like officially over, and then I will complete the series. But I still do have like overall positive thoughts about the series. I'm just kind of ready for the series to be completed. So I don't have all the books with me right now because there's like a million, but the first book is The Awakening. The Reckoning is book 3. This is my favorite book in this series. Blue Means You. So fantastic, amazing. I had so much fun reading this one. And I also wanted to give a shout out to book 5, which is Cursed Fates. Also another really solid edition of the series, particularly in like the romance aspect, but this book was traumatizing. I cried so hard at the ending of this book and I just kind of lost all hope essentially after finishing this one, but definitely a book that was great on the romance, terrible on the trauma. My next fantasy romance recommendation, it is going to be a little bit different than all of the other books that I've recommended thus far. This recommendation goes out to my literary fiction girlies. This is one of the most beautifully written books that I've ever read and is also one of my favorite books of all time, and that is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. So as I said, this book is very different from the other ones that I recommended, not only with the writing style, but also with the content of this book. So this is a retelling of Dracula's Brides and it follows this polyamorous relationship, but it also definitely focuses on themes of abuse and abusive relationships. So I definitely, number one, just want to say please check trigger warnings before you go into this book. But if you do decide to pick this one up, it is a really, really beautifully written book. This is one of those books that I'm like, every single line is stunning. Every single line needs to be tattooed on my body. It is so, so beautiful. And while there are definitely darker themes within the relationships in this book, there is also a really beautiful relationship in this book, particularly between Constanta and Magdalena. I would love a 700-page book about them and their romance. They start off kind of as rivals, but then end up falling in love with each other, and they are just the highlight of this book. I absolutely love them, and overall, while there are definitely heavy themes and sad themes within this book, I truly think it's a work of art. I think it is so, so stunning, and I really, really recommend this if you just love that like very flowery writing style, very lyrical writing style. I think that you would really like this. My next fantasy romance book recommendation is going to be Blood Mercy by Vela Roth. This is a book that I'm definitely going to recommend if you are somebody who is an avid fan of the fantasy genre, particularly epic fantasy, because the writing style is a little bit more heavy, info dumpy, epic fantasy style. But I absolutely love this book. I read this just 1 or 2 months ago and I gave it 4 stars. There are, I think, 4 other books in the series, I want to say, maybe 4 or 5. The series is still being written as we speak. I've read the first book in the series and I just feel very confident that the rest of the series is going to be really great, so I wanted to include it in this video. This book follows Cassia and Leo. This is another like kind of vampire fantasy romance. Leo is a Hesperine, which is a vampiric-like being, and Cassia is the daughter of a king, and the Hesperine people come to Cassia's father's kingdom and they kind of have like peace treaty, peace talks, and it's a very like political forward book. But Cassia has her own reasons for wanting to connect with a Hesperine, and she and Leo end up running into each other in the middle of the forest in the middle of the night and striking up a really beautiful friendship. This is definitely a sweeter romance. Our main guy, Leo, is definitely a cinnamon roll and definitely more of like an academically inclined romance hero, but I thought he was such a breath of fresh air and I absolutely loved him. The love that Leo has for Cassia is poetic. It is so beautiful. He is so obsessed with her and I love it. And Cassia, of course, is very taken by Leo as well. This book, I will say, does start off a little bit slow. The first half of the book, there was a lot of information, but by the time you get to the halfway mark, the romance heats up, the plot is crazy, and the way that this book ended has me so excited to continue on with the series, and I think that this is such a gem. I loved this so much and definitely recommend. All right, and my very last fantasy romance book recommendation is The Girly of the Hour. Everyone is talking about her, and that is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I absolutely love this book. I gave it 5 stars. I'm not gonna go too much into why I love this book because I just read it a couple weeks ago. I'll talk about it more in my May wrap up, but I 100% recommend as a fantasy romance. It is so freaking good. I had so much fun reading this book. This book follows Violet Sorrengail. Violet ends up going to this college called Basgiath, I believe it's pronounced, and it's a war college. There are a ton of different avenues you can go down in this college. You can be a healer, you can be a scribe, which is what Violet thought she was going to do, but her mother kind of forces her to be a dragon rider. And when you are in the dragon rider program, the tagline is you graduate as a dragon rider or you die. So the stakes are very, very high. Violet has to learn how to be a dragon rider when she has not prepared for this throughout her whole life. There is also a slow burn romance in this book between her and Xaden Ryerson. I love Xaden so much. He is everything. He is a new book boyfriend, and their dynamic is just so fantastic. But this book ends up having lots of twists and turns, especially kind of towards the end. The plot twists are insane. Also, Rebecca Yarros is going to hurt your feelings when you read this book, so get prepared for that. I cried multiple times, and I just really, really liked how this book ended. There's a lot of political intrigue going on, and I'm excited to see what else she does with this series. I did see a video yesterday where Rebecca Yarros said that as of right now, this is going to be a 5-book series, which I'm very excited for because there is so much of this world that I want to discover and read more about. So I absolutely loved Fourth Wing. 10 out of 10 recommend. 5-star fantasy romance for me. Also, I didn't mention that there's telepathic dragons in this book, but I feel like that's the most important part. So yeah, definitely pick this up. The dragons are absolutely amazing. All right, friends, so that is going to be it. Those are all of my fantasy romance book recommendations for now. As you guys know, I'm constantly reading fantasy romance, trying to find new faves. So I will definitely be back for a part 2 TBD. If you made it to this point in the video, go ahead and leave the crossing swords and a dragon emoji for fantasy romance. Please make sure that you are following me on Instagram and Goodreads. Both are always linked down below. I really appreciate that you watched this video. I hope that you guys are having a fantastic day. I love you all so much, and I will catch you guys in the next one.